Hey y'all, so I'm doing this twist and talk. I am obsessed with all things black girl hair lately. I cut my locks almost a year ago. So I've been really obsessed with all things black girl hair, getting back in touch with loose natural hair, and always having been in touch with how powerful it is for Black people in particular to love on our hair, how hair can seem like such a shallow, meaningless thing, and how it can be, but it can also be something like Blackness that is not just about this one isolated thing. It's actually connected to culture. It's connected to resistance. It's connected to things that were taken away from us. I think all the time about the women and men who didn't get to care for their hair. I think all the time about the Black people all over the world who didn't get to care for their hair. They just had to wrap it up like, oh, I have mine wrap up. No, not from a space of beautification or wanting to or nonchalance, but because they were so very busied with everything but taking care of themselves, whether that was being with their children or having time to read a book or to feel through their hair or to make, mixtures for their hair or whatever. All of those things I think about when I think about my hair. And I've always been I call it hair inclined person. I've always been into my hair. In high school, I had like every hairstyle ever. And I still love playing in hair. And I have 2 daughters. They both have locks and I love doing their hair and all of that. So, I've been enjoying YouTube videos around Black hair, around natural hair specifically. And so I was like, usually when I do my hair, I just deep conditioned it and all of that is wash day. So usually I will watch videos while I do my hair. But then I started watching these twist and talks where folks are just twisting their hair, either doing a, 2-strand twist or whatever, styling their hair and talking about something of relevance to them. And I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. I want to do that. So that's what I'm doing. I'll put all the products here, and the one that I'm mostly proud of is this snot looking stuff, which is my first batch of homemade flaxseed gel. That process was nice and easy. And the video that I watched to make it, I'll put that link below. Also, I have a cold, right? You hear that? And my nose is stripping because I have a cold. But I still wanted to do this because I think it's a good opportunity. So we shall start. Shout out to my cousin Nikki for this bonnet because it's been through many things, but it's doing so well here. So washed my hair, didn't pre-poo this time. And I did the LOC method. Usually I do LCO. So for the liquid, my hair was still wet, so it was mostly water, but I also have a mixture here that I made of aloe vera gel. So primarily aloe vera juice, right? So aloe vera juice that you would buy from the store to drink, pure aloe vera juice and some spring water. So it's mostly aloe vera juice and spring water. So I use that as my liquid. And then I have some oil mix up on my mic, and I transferred it into a smaller bottle. And this is just extra virgin olive oil, so EVOO, and hemp seed oil, and a couple of drops of peppermint. So I put all of that in my hair, and then that was liquid oil, and then I used this leave-in conditioner. So that was it, and then I just twisted it up. So now I'm going to use my flaxseed gel and sometimes a little bit of that liquid mixture and just twist up my ear and talk. So this conversation is going to be about unschooling and deschooling. And it's very interesting to me that what started out as a focus on learning and education ended up being so much about like my own personal journey and also how I show up in the world and how conscious I am about how I show up in the world. You'll see this. this in 2013, I got a mosquito bite right here. I remember exactly where we were the time we were living in Jamaica for half the year, and I got a mosquito bite right here. And that shit ain't never go away. Like, the bump is still there. Can you see that? How it's like that tufted thing? Anyway, unschooling started out being very much about this idea of, okay, my daughters are not wanting to be in the school environment. I feel like they can learn on their own. Marley, our oldest, kept saying that she wanted to learn from books at home. We talked about homeschooling and that I did not want to do that. And she didn't want that either. And Sage just didn't want to be around Denman brush. I mean, who doesn't have one of these at this point? Great detangler. So yeah, they kept saying those things, and I was like, okay. Eventually, Chris and I understood that we had to remove them from school. And so we did that, and then went about the process of trying to find ways to still give them what we felt like they needed. I'm loving this. This is my first time using the flaxseed gel for a twist out. And I like the slip. Oh my God, I'm a YouTube hair vlogger. Yeah, I like the slip that it gives, and it's supposed to be a good moisturizer. My mom has made this a few times. Hi, Mommy. Shout out to you, Valerie. But it's my first time making it because I don't want to keep using any other sort of hair butters besides what I do to seal in my moisture. So anyway, we started out there and said, all right, yeah, we get it. They need something different. We shouldn't even have them in the system anyway, because, that's not even good for Black folks in terms of our sense of identity and seeing ourselves in history and all of that. We knew all of those things. So all of those things felt like perfectly good reasons to take them out of school. But we still didn't fully grasp what it meant to be doing learning outside of the school environment. We were still doing school at home to some extent. So what I want to share is how we got from that point to what we do now and what our daughters do now. And I'm hoping that that gives you sort of an overview of unschooling, but in a way that also connects it to liberation work and healing work and social justice work. Healing justice work, in a large sense, right? And I'm hoping that that would be enough of an example for you to understand why unschooling isn't just about like an alternative education model. Okay. So I have jotted down in a thing here some notes because I wanted to, this actually just came to me today. I wrote it down in the Uber on the way to the store earlier today. It says there are 3 stages, right, that are connected to liberation work and unschooling: schoolishness, deschooling, and unschooling. Schoolishness is we think it's them. And by them, I mean our children or children, period. So first we think it's them. And then we think it's the other them, the systems, the government, education system, all of that. Then we realize that it's us. So all of that is schoolishness. Once we realize that it's us, we slip out of the schoolishness phase into deschooling. That's when we go to the other them, not them as the kids, and not them as the system, but them as like our parents and other childhood influences. Oh, this is why I'm closed off. This is why I allowed my kid to do this because this thing happened to me when I was 7 and my mom didn't do this and da da da. All valid things, but that's that first stage of deschooling. So then we realize that it's them and us, that it's society. Then we begin to realize that society is made up of them plus us. So it's not just about our parents, and it's not just about the systems, and it's not just about children. That's when we start unschooling. So in unschooling, you're still deschooling, but it's the practice, not the study, right? It's the transition from researching to applying it to your life. And I want to, hopefully, in the time it takes to twist my hair, explain how that happened generally for Chris and me, and Marley and Sage, our daughters. So, when we first took them out of school, we were doing a virtual academy, which we did for a very short time because they resisted that, especially Marley. So then we started to task them with things wherever we went. So one thing we would do when we would travel, and for the first maybe 6 years, Jamaica was really the only place we went to besides the US. So we went to different states in the US. But in terms of other countries, it was just Jamaica. One of the things that they would need to do wherever we lived was to draw a map, to walk out the space, and we would walk out the space all together, or sometimes it would just be Chris and them. And then they would draw maps. They would take a few days, Marley and Sage, to draw maps, and they could ask us for help, and all of that. And so we did things like that. Then it transitioned into current events things where it's like, oh, you can pick anything from aljazeera.com and talk to us about it for 5 minutes, or do a 15-minute presentation or something like that. We were still feeling like we needed to make sure that they got certain things, that they were exposed to certain bits of information that was happening in the world. Oh, look. And it has leave-in conditioner in there, as well as the flaxseed gel. So it should dry clear, which is usually what happens even when I use other product. And this is natural things. So see we shall. Yeah, so we were still doing that. And it felt good. It felt like, look at us. Our children are not in a classroom. They're doing their thing. And then they're also getting to know about things in the world and things that we think are important that people need to know about. We're doing that for some time. But that transition from it's not the system to it's us, like that first part, the end part of the schoolishness phase, how that happened for us was we realized things like bodily autonomy and how those were connected to how we related to the girls, how things we were doing outside of education were things that we were doing without the girls' consent. Because, of course, the tasks that we gave them, the academic related things or the research related things or the current events related things, those were not their choice. If we gave them a choice, they would say, no, thank you. And so that felt to us like, well, that's fine. Of course, they're going to say no, thank you. Like, we were still in the schoolish mindset. But, is that rain? Oh, sounds like rain and wind. But there were other things that we were also doing without their consent, thinking that they needed us to make those choices for them. And it turns out they didn't. So, for example, let's see. So, for example, Sage, and I've written about this and we talked about it and I feel totally comfortable sharing. It still makes me giggle. Sage and bras, when she got to the stage where she needed some support, she just was resistant of bras. And I was like, you're going to have to find another way to be, like resistant to the system or the cause or the powers that be or me or whatever, because what's not going to happen is you're not going to be walking around in these streets with, droopy titties. And the way that she reacted to that, and those weren't my exact words, but basically that's where my mind was. Like, it's my responsibility to make sure that she has non-droopy titties or some shit. I don't know. But anyway, those back and forths made me question why I thought that it was necessary to make her wear a bra. Was it necessary for her to wear a bra? Was it necessary for anyone to wear a bra? What would happen if one did not wear a bra? So then I went down the road of that research and realized that we don't need to wear a bra. There's several things. One, we don't. It's not like medically connected to anything for sure. You know, there are ideas that are touted, and then there's other research that dismisses that research and all of that. You could do that research for yourself. And I've also done some, I'll put a link to the essay that I did about bras. It's in the description box. So it made me question that. And I did the research, as I said, and realized, oh, okay, so we don't need to wear bras. And then even further, what the hell if the focus is on keeping her breast perky? What is that about? Who is that about? Who is that for? If she is making a decision about her body now, and I am choosing not to honor that because of what I believe is important for her body, how can I say that she's a free person? You know, how can I say that she has the right to her body and that other people shouldn't touch or make choices about her body without her consent? It just started to feel like both of those things couldn't be true. So I had to really be with that. And then what I concluded was that I was doing that because I had the idea that women would want to have a certain type of breast for as long as possible, meaning perky titties as long as possible. And that also she needed it because if she was running, it would hurt or something like that. And I was asking her about that, and she was like, nope, I'm not having any pains. So I was like, well, let me just wait until she needs it. Just like with a lot of other things, I don't force it on her. I wait until she says that she's ready for it. So I decided that I would do that with the bra thing. And what it turned out to be is that she really just didn't like bras with wires, those underwire bras. Who the fuck does? She ended up, and still now, years later, she just likes sports bras. And that's all she needs in terms of support. That's all that's what she prefers, most importantly. And that's it. So had I pushed the issue, she might have developed some sort of complex around her breast or something, the same way that I have complexes about, like, you know, having my knees be really dark or whatever, because for years, you know, hearing people say, oh, you don't want to black up your knee, and, you know, these sort of things that come up. It's like I was unknowingly building up this idea of you need to present a certain way, you need to look a certain way, you need to show up a certain way, and you should care about how people view your body. Not for hygiene purposes, not for safety purposes, not for any of that, but simply because that's what I believe. That was one example of deschooling that started to happen. I started to recognize that this had nothing to do with what she was or wasn't learning academically. It was about her body and her rights. And the more time that Chris and I spent with them, the more that sort of thing would come up, where we would recognize that the discussions that we were having with them were actually about their bodies and their rights. Like with hitting, that was another thing that for us, from our culture as Jamaicans, is very much normal. You hit a child until they don't need to be hit anymore, you know, until they mature. And we stopped seeing that as an option for several reasons, including and particularly and I talked about this on my podcast, when I was on the Steve Harvey show, and one of the women, Tanya, I think, was on there, and she was the woman who was known for hitting her son because he went to a protest instead of going to school. And I can't even recall at the moment which one of our bodies were being, that we got together to protest it being lynched on the streets somewhere. But that's where he was. If you recall the video, and the mom found out that he was skipping school and doing that, and she went and was like hitting him and all of that. And I remember hearing her say, she basically that she did it, not verbatim, but basically that she did it because she loved him, right? And I'd seen videos of her before and interviews of her before. And she was like, our children aren't safe. I need to know where he is. The police hunt our boys, all of these truths. But the bottom line was that she was hitting him, saying that, and very much believing, not just saying, that it was from a space of love. And I realized that I did the same thing. I was doing the same thing. It just wasn't captured on tape or whatever. And maybe it looked different, but it's the same thing, because I was making a decision whenever, my kid would misbehave that I was going to use physical violence, whether it was just a slap or a pinch or, just a slap, just a pinch, just a little tap on the butt, whatever the thing was. It was a clear message that I control your body. I am in charge of your body, and I can hurt it, and I can put on it whatever I want, and I can make you do whatever I want with it in terms of your time, in terms of your attention, in terms of your physicality. And the more time we spent together, and they would resist that, sometimes just in small ways. It usually wasn't like a no, because they were afraid, because I in particular, and Chris had too with Marley, slapped them before, and I'd hit Marley before, and Sage, I think I might have pinched her before. I'm pretty sure that I had. So those things, the more we spent time together and the more they were exposed to different elements of things that were going on in the world when we weren't assigning it to them, but we were just talking about, like Chris and I would be talking about something that we saw that happened, or one of them would bring up something they saw that happened in the world where someone was hurt or otherwise harmed, right? Some sort of harm, whether it was to their physical self or whatever. And we would talk about those things. And the more we did, the more they started to recognize, and the more Chris and I also started to recognize that everything is everything. everything. Because if I'm a person who says that I don't believe that violence should be inflicted on someone with less power by, a person in power for whatever the person in power decides, if I don't believe that to be true, if my supervisor can't walk up to me and hit me because I came in late or because I didn't do what she said or he said, if that's not okay, what am I modeling, and how could it be okay then for me to do that at home? How? What message am I conveying to my children? And also, what am I living? I'm not living the same thing I believe when I do that, right? So when I commit these acts that I'm against in every other environment except when I do it to my kids, that should just stop making sense. That wasn't right. It wasn't okay. And we saw it, and our daughters saw it. And I keep talking about the things that they resisted. And I've been recently very much feeling through this idea of resistance as guidance. Whenever there's resistance from my children, for me to always include the reality of it being an opportunity for them to guide me towards a better option, right? So I began to recognize the ways that my behaviors were contrary to what I believed. I just realized that the things that they were resistant towards were usually a place where I was using my power in a way that was negative, in a way that was harmful to them, but was normal for me, because that's the world that we live in. This is the sort of thing that happens to children by adults. So those things, and then Chris and I were constantly having those conversations, how we were recognizing that. And so that's the part where it's like, oh, it's not just one thing. It's not just the school system. It's not just the government. It's not just what happened when we were children. The ways that our parents survived whatever happened to them in childhood and brought over things, habits that were harmful to us. It wasn't any one set of those things. It's the way that all of those things play out in the decisions that I make as a parent. And also the way the effects of those things play out in the decisions that I make as a person in the world. And recognizing that those two things were connected. So if I didn't believe something to be right, was I doing that thing that I didn't believe to be right at home because I could, because I was in a position of power? And if so, could I see whether and how that was affecting my relationship with my children? And I could totally see it. I could completely see it because we were deschooling. And so when you recognize, or from I use statements, when I recognize that I was just very much a part of the problem in terms of the things that I felt like my daughters didn't have in the world, the things that were unfair in the world, unjust, the ways that, man, this conditioner did not dry. I really hope this thing dries clear. I think it will. I just realized that I couldn't keep blaming everything else because I was a part of society. And that's when I started putting out videos and audio around, the idea that all this liberation work we're doing, if it's not freeing our children, if our children are still feeling oppressed and we don't have any level of regard for that, we just keep trying to figure out how to fit them into the system so they don't have to struggle through the same things we did and all of those things. That's not freedom. Because if freedom isn't benefiting the generation that came after us, that comes after us, then to me, I'm not doing my job. And then also, if I believe one thing and I'm practicing something else, obviously that makes me a hypocrite. And so there were a lot of things that I believe in, like bodily autonomy, like people's right to express themselves if that self-expression isn't harming other people, like people's, the necessity of people learning their own body rhythms so that they can make smart decisions for themselves, like what time to go to bed, how much to eat, how much you need to sleep. Some people need 7 hours. Some people do better if they get 9 or 10 hours. Like all of these things that I was recognizing in adulthood that I could never have recognized when I was younger. One might say because maybe I wouldn't be responsible with that knowledge. I don't agree because I get to see it all the time with young people, not just my children, be super responsible and super present about their bodies because they have that knowledge and get to practice it. And one might also say that I would have understood my body and myself and my needs and had time and practice to articulate them better if I'd had more practice and more freedom to know myself. So, that's why, for example, our daughters who are 14 and 12 don't have a bedtime. They don't have a designated time that we need them to go to bed. For what? Those were one of the things that came from our unschooling practice. So when we were deschooling, we were thinking about the different ways to give them more freedom, to back up so they can have the freedom that human beings are born with in more ways. And then when we switched over to unschooling, then we started to put it into practice, right? So even though we've been unschooling all this time in terms of these 3 stages, schoolishness, deschooling, and unschooling, this is when we started unschooling because we said, yeah, no, if we believe that it's important for people to understand their own bodies as a part of responsible autonomy, having autonomy over one's body, and having practice with what that actually means, not just a set of words that sound good, then they have to actually own their bodies. So unschooling meant that we had to remove that restriction of when to go to bed, because what was that based on? That was based on our ideas of when they needed to sleep or wake up. And what was that based on? What they did when they were toddlers and babies? That's not the same thing that they need now. And I don't know that. I couldn't know that. They're the person who needs to know that. And my support of them should look like giving them the space to learn that. That's what we believe. And that's what unschooling means for us. That's one example of how we practice it. Giving them the space to do that. So like, I just had a really good conversation with Marley where she said, oh, I'm going to do another vegan month in November because I didn't feel well today. And I was like, what do you mean you didn't feel well? What happened? She's like, well, during my workout, I had to stop like 20 minutes in. She's a dancer. And so she does workouts most days. And so I was like, well, are you sure it wasn't just tied to like, maybe you just worked out a little too much, or you just came back from the camp. Maybe at the camp you didn't get enough sleep or whatever. She's like, no, I got enough sleep. But the problem is I just ate foods that weren't just good for my body. And so she was explaining what she was having, like ice cream for breakfast and leftover chicken and she brought this up to me and to say that, yeah, she didn't feel good in her body today. And so she's going to use November to just really fill up with the nutrients that make her body feel good. And for her, that means not including any sort of meat, or, including fish or whatever, just going vegan. So if she didn't have the space and time to understand what worked for her body, to know that, your mom is plant-based, your dad, he doesn't eat beef or pork, but he eats all the other meats and stuff. Your mom is plant-based-ish because sometimes I will bite a turkey burger. All of these things, she got information from us about different foods, and she knows that I have different struggles with my body as a result of how I was eating in the past, and endometriosis and fibroid tumors and all of these things. All of that information she knows about her parents, because background information is important. But she also knows about her body from experience that when she eats primarily plant-based, she has more energy. She doesn't feel sick. Her cycles are easier in terms of not having fatigue or nausea. She had to recognize that. And the only way that she could recognize that was not from my words, but from her putting that into practice in her actual body, which is what she's been able to do. So we don't hold them to whatever we believe, but we do share knowledge about the things that we learn and the things that we research, but we don't make them change their habits or their minds or their bodies based on that. So those are some of the ways that it's different than just like school at home. But I want to make sure too that I address the social justice component. So as I talked about things like bodily autonomy, with hitting and, with the bras and with even bedtime and all of that, somebody forcing you to do something with your body. We extend that through conversation and also just through life experience, because these things happen all the time, to, okay, if I am a person who knows that freedom means that I get to do these things, what are some of the ways that I get in the way of other people feeling free to do whatever they want to do? So when they are in community with other people, when they were at a self-directed education center for most of this year and some of last year in Atlanta, they were in a space where they got to practice those sort of things. Did I just put a knot at the end of my hair? Come on, man. They were in the social justice focus space. Oh no, I really did put a knot in my hair, y'all. Anyway, when they were at Heartwood, a part of what they did there at this self-directed space was to talk about social justice and the idea of equity and the agreements that they make and the culture that they co-create and the agreements that need to be honored in order for everyone to feel free and, that the culture is inclusive of them. So that was great. But also we did a lot of that at home and did a lot of that in conversation. So even with things like, I grew up with very much this idea of fat being a bad thing. If somebody is fat, that's something that you would make fun of or something that was undesirable. Right? So a state of being that was undesirable or a person that was undesirable. And now living in a world and having friends and conversations and realities that show me how that would be me oppressing someone else, to place that judgment on that person, to open my mouth to express that judgment, whether it was to the person or to somebody else. How that's tied into all these different things, how it's tied into the idea of what beauty is. Oh, good, I got it out. How that's tied into, even white supremacist ideas of beauty, because skinny is the thing and everything else is a problem. How that's tied into consumerism, because then they sell you everything to make sure that you don't get fat, even though they're also giving you things that harm your body. And, all of these things are happening, and all I can do about all of those things is to be like, oh, this person's fat, that's bad, or to make fun of the person, or to make a decision or a judgment call or a statement about what they should or shouldn't be eating. So recognizing that means we have those conversations with the girls. And when they bring that up, if they're in community with people who are not in that space and they say, oh, ew, she's fat, or I don't want to get fat or whatever, we talk about to them directly the issues with that, right? Not in a way that is like, okay, you're a bad person for saying that, but talking to them about that whole reality of the judgment of that and why that's none of their business what somebody looks like, and also the ways that if someone is struggling with their weight, because someone being fat doesn't mean that they're always struggling with their weight, but that if someone is, why is it our right or our choice to say anything, and how is that helpful? And if the person is not struggling with their weight, to have that conversation with them too, about the fact that everybody isn't trying to be skinny. And also the consumerism aspect. So all of those things. And that's tied, obviously, I think, to social justice and to healing work and to healing justice, and to recognize how me pointing out something, I'm man, I think about like my younger days, middle school, high school, my idea of fat being such a bad thing for other people and also potentially for myself, right? If I was having these conversations with someone who was helping me to connect this idea of fat to all of these other realities in the world, to consumerism, to, diet culture and the harms of that, and to the different things that happen to young girls and boys and all other sort of identifying folk, when a system and a society is constantly saying to them, you need to look this way, or you looking this way is bad. Like what happens to them, and how that affects all of us, but also specifically how it affects those people. We get to have those conversations. And now they're looking at it from a very different space. And I'm like, if somebody was talking to me about that, then I wouldn't end up, late in adulthood, to me, before I even started recognizing why that was harmful. Right? Because you'll hear a lot of people talk about how unschooling, that came up at the unschooling conference I was at this weekend, saying that unschooling seems very individualistic, and I guess I can understand that. Not I guess, I can definitely understand that perspective for outside looking in. But I also need for us to remember that society, community, family is made up of individuals. And so if we are not aware of ourselves and feeling comfortable and confident in our bodies, then we're not going to be in community with other people, maybe geographically, but we'll be treating each other in ways that schooling promotes, which is very much the, I gotta shine, I'm an individual, let me show you how I'm better than whatever. That sort of mentality, that's what's gonna happen if we don't own ourselves. Then all of the other systems own us, just like what was the case with me and with Chris. And we were making decisions based on those systems. We were making decisions about Marley and Sage based on the school system. And also the capitalist system, because we wanted them to have all the things, all the opportunities. We were making these decisions based on these things that were not about them, not about them as people. And it also didn't benefit the system that we believed in. And that system is community. When you're in school, you spend so much time away from your actual community and your family, because the school that becomes your community and your family. And for some people, that's good, especially for some children, that's good, because that might be the safest community and space that they have, just like some churches, right? Those are two things that I'm not into. I'm not into schools and I'm not into churches, but I do very much understand how important those structures have been and continue to be for people to feel a sense of community, and for people to be safe. In some cases, for people to get something to eat, especially children. But what I do have a problem with, far more, because I don't have a problem with school and church being other people's thing. They're just not mine. But what I do have a problem with is when we make the decision that since those places are beneficial for some, then everybody else who is having a major problem with that, particularly school now, they need to figure out how to get in where they fit in. They need to fit into the program. Something is wrong with you. Something is wrong with you as a parent if you're not doing everything you can to get your kid to comply with the school system. Something is wrong with your kid if they're not complying with the school system. That's the problem. And then you start to realize that the school system is not just it's not just the school system, because everything is everything. That system is fed by other industries, the medical industry, because your kids have to get certain shots to be there. So the pharmaceutical industry in that sense, the issues with food, even what is in schools, like what children are eating. And yes, again, for some, those are the meals that they can get that day. And then also for others, and for anybody, why wouldn't the food be real food? A bunch of GMO type deals sitting in I'm trying not to get tangential. Okay. So there are all of these spaces and all of these instances and all of these children who are suffering inside of these systems, who are made to be there, not because that's the place where they can get something to eat, not because that's the only option for their parents or whatever, but because we believe that that's where they can get the best shot at a good life, and all the things that we didn't have, or all the things that we do have, and want to make sure that they develop their own, depending on where you are. Yeah. You start to see, because of unschooling for us and because of deschooling, we started to see the interconnectedness of those different systems, school with pharmaceutical, with government, I researched how curriculum is adopted into a school, how that happens and how little actual teachers have to do with that process and how much politicians have to do with that process. And that if I don't believe in that sort of process, then I couldn't have my kid in school. So that's easy. They weren't in school. But what are the other processes that I didn't believe in, but I was still participating in? And a lot of those were just about someone's right to own themselves and express themselves. And those things are not just connected to individuals and not just connected to homes, but it also is connected to how we treat other people and how we expect to be treated. So if we have more practice with what it means to be just, and we have more language around how to communicate with someone when we're not happy with something, or when we want to try to create something different, when something isn't working for a group of us. If we don't have any language or practice around that because school just says, get in where you fit in, what kind of society are we building? what sort of social justice work are we doing in the world if we just follow along with the same system that we don't agree with, you know? So yes, unschooling absolutely gives a young individual an opportunity to focus on themselves, but it does so very much in ways, and I was just in community this past weekend with many people who've had very similar experiences, and through the podcast you hear them too. Oh, these coming out cute. What ends up happening is that a sense of community emerges, and young people want to protect that. They self-organize and they look at ways to solve issues that they're having among each other. Dr. Sanjata and I talked about that in this webinar that we just released called How to Focus on Learning. We talked about what happens how young people are oftentimes our guides. You know, he co-founded an Agile Learning Center in Metro Atlanta. And he talks about, you know, the ways that we can model certain behaviors, but also the ways that when you just observe children, how there's so much that they don't need us for. And not only do they not need us for it, but we need them. We need to be able to see how they manage the problem in a way that, oh, we have a label for that. That's actually, what do you call it? Restorative justice work. You know, all of these things that they do quite naturally. You know, when they look at if somebody in their group did something wrong, they don't just want to penalize the person. They also want to look at what caused the behavior. Like, these are normal things that we see in unschooling spaces like schools and also in homes. We've seen it in our own home. They're looking at the rationale behind the behavior. They're looking at ways to try to address the behavior, to support the person in changing the behavior. I'm like, my research later on in life showed me that these are things that happen in like Alcoholics Anonymous, and again, you know, places that do work around restorative justice or, you know, social justice work. Children do these things naturally, especially when they are children who are not forced to do schoolish things, who are not beholden to the school system. You know, a lot of the things that we say children shouldn't have the freedom to do because look what happened when they have it. Who we're observing are children who have been surviving school for years, right? Or we say, what happens if a kid is not in school? They're going to become a criminal of some kind or what. I was just talking to a woman the other day who was saying that, yeah, if they don't go to school, that's how criminals. Okay, thanks. Yeah, in school is where a lot of people get so disconnected from themselves and their realities that they end up doing, you know, shit to just like feel something. And also the idea that people doing criminal activity are all bad is foolish because again, everything is everything. So if there's systemic issues, then you're going to see results of those issues in the people. And that is not because the person didn't go to school. So yeah, I don't know. I'm enjoying this twist and talk because I'm doing two things that I love, talking about unschooling and playing in my hair. But yeah, it's long as shit. What time? Okay. It's almost an hour. Yeah. Why is it dark now? But I think I'm going to stop here, y'all. I don't know. Trying to figure out why the camera is doing this weird shit. Anyway, that's it. I appreciate you listening. I don't know why the camera is doing that weird light and dark thing. And I hope it was useful for you. Let me know if it was useful in some ways and what sort of things you might want to hear more about. Because I twist my hair every like 7 to 10 days, shout. All right, peace.